The room of gentle refusals. The rain had softened the city into a quiet blur tonight. Aya walked home with a careful pace and a steady breath. She had promised herself a new start after this evening. Her heart felt ready and open and simple and brave. Yet her mind kept tugging at the edges of that promise. It whispered, "Not yet, and maybe later, and please be careful." A small ache lived behind her eyes and would not leave. It felt like a hand pressing a door that should open. In her apartment, the lights were calm and warm and low. She set her bag down and washed her hands in silence. The water was warm and the quiet felt almost kind. She dried her hands and faced the mirror and waited. Her face looked steady, but her jaw carried a small storm. She smiled, and the smile shook like thin glass in wind. She spoke to the mirror with a simple, straight voice. "I will let go now, and I will be fine." The words sounded honest, yet something inside did not move. She felt a familiar pull toward old pictures in drawers. Aya opened the drawer near the bed and paused again. Inside the drawer lay a bundle of letters tied gently. The ribbon looked tired, and the paper smelled like rain. Old love lived inside those pages like sleeping sparks. She had kept them after the breakup for one reason. She told herself the letters were part of her learning. Truthfully, they were part of her longing and her fear. Tonight she planned to release them and step forward kindly. Her heart felt ready like a bird at the open window. Her brain felt slow like a guard counting old keys. She lit a candle and placed the letters on the table. She brought a metal bowl and a pitcher of water nearby. She would burn the letters and calm the ashes with care. She had read this could help the heart make peace. The plan was simple and safe and private and kind. Still, her body carried a hush of warning and delay. Her shoulders tightened and her fingers cooled and trembled. The brain does not love doors that shut forever. The brain prefers known rooms even when the rooms hurt. Aya sat and breathed and listened to that quiet resistance. The first letter waited like a closed eye on the table. She untied the ribbon and felt a faint pull inside. The handwriting looked like a river she once loved. She remembered the day she first traced those letters. It had been spring and the park smelled like mint. The memory rose and crossed the room and sat down. Aya pressed her fingers to her temples and spoke softly. "I have learned what I needed and I am safe." She meant it, and she could feel a small warmth grow. But the warmth met a wall as old as childhood. Her phone buzzed from the kitchen and broke the spell. The message came from her younger cousin named Yusra. A single line waited in a bright small bubble. "Are you okay tonight? I had a strong feeling." Aya smiled and wrote a gentle answer with care. "I am okay, and I am making a hard choice." Then she put the phone face down and breathed again. The room grew quiet with only rain and candle breath. She took the first letter and read the opening line. Her chest lifted and fell like a slow and heavy tide. The words were sweet and also heavy with old promises. They carried a music that once felt like a future. Her eyes warmed and she let the feeling pass through. She folded the letter and reached for the flame. The paper darkened and curled and gave a tiny sigh. Smoke lifted like a thin path toward the ceiling. When the flame reached her name, she felt a quick sting. She dropped the page into the bowl and watched in stillness. A part of her opened and a part of her closed. She poured water and heard the soft sound of release. She knew the process would not be fast or dramatic. She knew change often feels simple and also strange. She opened the second letter and felt the pull strengthen. The brain tracks patterns and guards against sudden loss. It keeps maps of places and people and repeated feelings. It chooses safety by repeating what once reduced pain, even when that pattern now creates new pain and confusion. Aya understood this in theory from years of reading. Practice felt different and human and a little raw. She held that truth like a warm stone in winter. The second letter carried a memory of a train ride. She could feel the seat under her and the window light. She could smell coffee and the clean metal of rails. A laugh lived between the lines and touched her gently. Tears rose and fell, and she let them fall freely. She did not rush her grief or try to shrink it. She whispered, "You are allowed to feel and still release." The letter burned slower than the first and sent embers. Her heartbeat grew loud and then softened into a wave. The bowl held black petals that once were voice. Aya paused and sipped water and set the glass down. She noticed a tightness in her throat like a knot. The knot held words she once could not say. Her brain had learned to stay small to feel safe. That habit had once helped her survive a loud home. In that home, love changed shape and rules without warning. Her brain remembered that and liked to control endings now. Letting go felt like walking into a room without exits. Her heart said the room had windows and honest light. Her brain said the windows might close and trap the air. She stood and walked to the window and watched the street. Two umbrellas moved like slow planets below the lamplight. A bus sighed and carried strangers toward their late stops. The city seemed to hold everyone with a quiet hand. Aya pressed her palm to the glass and named her fear. She said, "I fear being alone with empty hands again." She said, "I fear the night will stretch without kindness." Naming fear made the room feel larger and kinder and truer. Her shoulders lowered and she returned to the table slowly. She placed the third letter on the flame with care. This letter did not burn at first and resisted her. She smiled at the thought and spoke to the page. "I see you and the promise you held for me. I thank you for the season you helped me live. I do not need you now and I choose another season." The page caught fire and shifted into a soft glow. Aya laughed once and then let the quiet return. A warmth grew under her ribs like morning sunlight. Still, the old guard inside her kept a watch. It said, "Check again that you are not making a mistake." She listened closely and answered with calm and courage. "I am making a choice with full eyes and full breath. I am not erasing the past and I am reclaiming today." The brain resists because it cannot predict new roads. Prediction feels like safety and novelty feels like threat. But growth often hides inside the very shape of novelty. My heart is ready and my mind can learn safety again. My body can carry me through the brief shaking phase. I will move one small step at a time with kindness. She felt a slight yielding like snow softening under sun. The fourth letter was short and sweet and light. She burned it and the act felt almost easy now. Ease scared her a little because pain had been familiar. She checked her motives and found simple care inside. No revenge and no show and no secret audience here. Only a woman in a room with rain and breath. She placed both hands on the table and waited. The candle flame steadied like a friend who sits close. Some part of her brain began to rewrite simple rules. It learned that release could be safe when done gently. She remembered something her therapist once explained with patience. The mind is a maker of stories and of predictions. It runs tiny experiments and stores the results for later. Every safe release teaches the mind a different prediction. This will not ruin me and this will not erase love. This will make space for the life that is arriving. Aya felt that lesson settle without large fireworks or drama. The rain kept singing and the bowl held quiet flowers. She reached for the fifth letter and paused to listen. A small hum of dread rose but did not grow. She opened the letter and found a pressed leaf inside. She remembered the forest walk and the soft dirt underfoot. She remembered the brook and the way sunlight slipped through. She remembered the moment she almost told a hard truth. She had stayed quiet then to keep the peace. That choice became a pattern then ran through months. She saw that pattern now and did not hate herself. She forgave the part that had feared sudden, cold silence. She forgave the part that gave too much to stay. Forgiveness moved through her like warm tea on a cold day. The leaf burned quickly and left a delicate outline. She breathed and let her shoulders rest against the chair. She could sense a new tension forming at the edges. Sometimes progress wakes sleeping guards in deeper rooms. Those guards hold older stories with thicker walls and locks. They speak in urges and chills and a sudden ache. Aya stood and stretched and walked the length of the room. She named the room of gentle refusals tonight. Here the brain would say not yet and she would listen. Then she would answer with care and continue all the same. She returned to the table and lifted the sixth letter. Her fingers shook more than before and she paused. She closed her eyes and pictured a safe meadow. She saw a path and a simple wooden gate ahead. She remembered her breath as a key she always carries. She inhaled for 4 counts and exhaled for 6 counts. Her body softened and her thoughts slowed into steady lines. The letter opened to a story about a winter visit. The words praised her patience and her quiet, loyal nature. The praise now felt like a leash around her throat. She touched her neck and felt anger like a small flame. Anger can be clean when it protects a needed boundary. She thanked the anger for arriving on time tonight. She used that energy to choose herself with clarity. The letter burned and crackled like dry wood in January. She watched until the edges fell inward and turned peaceful. Her chest rose in a larger breath and held it. She felt taller inside her skin and steadier in mind. The candle flickered once, then returned to a firm glow. Outside, a car passed and sent a brief wash of light. Aya looked at the remaining letters and counted by touch. She would not finish all of them tonight, and that was fine. Small, consistent steps teach the brain a steadier rhythm. The lesson is safety and agency and simple presence now. She placed the last unburned letters back in the drawer. She kept the ribbon on the table as a marker. This ribbon would remind her of the path she chose. Release is a practice and not a single heroic event. Her heart was ready and her mind was learning readiness. Both could walk together without forcing the pace tonight. She wiped the table and washed the bowl with patience. The ash left faint silver on the water and swirled. She rinsed the bowl and cleaned her hands and breathed. She opened the window a little and let the room sigh. Rain air moved in and brushed her face with softness. The city sounded like a low ocean far below. She closed the window and sat on the floor quietly. She pressed her back against the bed and rested there. The candle kept her company like a small, attentive friend. She whispered, "Thank you," to her body for staying present. Her phone buzzed again and showed a voice note. It was from an old teacher named Miran from university. She had not heard from him in more than 2 years. His voice arrived steady and warm and slightly tired. "Aya, I heard from Yusra that you are shifting things. I am in town this week and I can offer company. There is a place I still use for gentle work, a small library where the air holds patient silence. If you want, we can meet tomorrow afternoon. We can speak about letting go and about safe change." Aya listened twice and felt gratitude rise like clear water. She typed a reply with a small smile and steady hands. "Thank you. I would like to meet and to talk." She set the phone down and turned off the overhead light. The room fell into candle shade and soft rain sound. Her eyes adjusted and found the bowl on the table. The shape looked like a small moon in a quiet sky. She thought about the brain and its careful protective ways. She did not curse it tonight, and she did not push. She promised to teach it safety with many patient repetitions. She moved to the bed and pulled the blanket carefully. Sleep often comes easier after a small, honest victory. She lay on her side and placed a hand on chest. The heartbeat felt slower and deeper and more regular now. Her feet warmed under the blanket and her jaw relaxed. She pictured the meadow again and the wooden gate. She pictured herself walking the path with calm steps. Each step carried the same sentence in a simple rhythm. "I can let go and I can stay safe today." The words met the breath and became a lullaby inside. As her thoughts drifted, she noticed a faint memory surface. A childhood room with a blue curtain and a chipped chair. A night when shouting downstairs turned plates into bright birds. She had hidden under the bed and held her breath. That night, her brain learned that silence could keep her safe. That lesson saved her then and shaped later choices. Tonight, she thanked that old strategy with a soft heart. She also told it that the house is different now. The doors are strong and the people do not smash things. Silence is not the only way to guard safety anymore. She felt the memory loosen and take a different seat. It did not vanish, and it did not command her. It became a guest rather than a hidden ruler tonight. This shift was quiet, but real and kind and firm. Her breathing matched the rain, and she slipped toward sleep. Before sleep fully came, she sensed something else arrive. It was not fear, and it was not longing either. It felt like a visitor who carries both science and story. A presence that would speak in the library tomorrow afternoon. A presence who understands why the brain resists gentle goodbyes. The candle went out with a small circle of smoke. Darkness settled, but it did not feel empty or cruel. Aya floated between waking and sleep with one simple thought. Tomorrow carries practice, and not a final test or trial. The brain will still resist, and the heart will still hope. Both can learn to share the same wider room. The room will have windows that open to clear air. She smiled in the dark and let sleep finally come. Outside, the rain stitched the city into soft, connected lines. The night held her like a teacher who truly cares. The library, where memories learn new steps, morning arrived with a pale sky and streets washed clean by rain. Aya woke before her alarm and lay still for a while. Her breath felt steady and her chest held a soft courage. She remembered the bowl of ashes and felt both light and strong. There was still a drawer of letters waiting for patient attention. She would not rush herself, and she would not drift away. Practice would carry her forward like a river with gentle current. She made tea and stood by the window in quiet attention. A few children hurried past with bright bags and small, brave voices. A street vendor arranged oranges like tiny suns along the cart. The city felt ordinary and kind and ready for work. Aya whispered a simple sentence to anchor the day. I move with care, and I tell myself the truth. The words rested well inside her and did not slip. By late morning, she dressed in soft jeans and a sweater. She chose shoes that felt like walking rather than display. She carried a notebook and a pen and a bottle. The bottle held water and a lemon slice for comfort. She placed the ribbon from last night into her pocket. It would serve as a signal when fear tried speaking loudly. She locked the door and took the stairs to the street. The library stood near the river where willow branches brushed water. Its doors were dark wood and the handles were cool brass. Inside, the air smelled like paper and calm and old sunlight. She spotted Miran near a window where dust floated like snow. His hair had grown a little and silver shone at temples. He stood with a slow smile and lifted a hand in greeting. Aya felt a warm ease and walked across the tiled floor. They sat at a round table near a shelf of memoirs. The table had small marks that spoke of long, honest conversations. Miran placed a notebook down and rested his hands together. He spoke with his steady voice and his patient rhythm. He said he was glad she came and that he understood. He said change bends us and wakes old guards and sharp stories. He asked if she wanted story first or lesson first today. Aya answered that both could walk together like friends in winter. She said a story could hold the lesson like a lantern. Miran nodded and looked at the window and then back. He said the brain is a keeper of maps and alarms. It loves what is predictable because prediction lowers the cost. It measures cost in effort and in risk and possible pain. Letting go removes a landmark and the keeper rings a bell. He continued in the same soft tone that felt like music. He said the keeper is not cruel and not foolish either. It simply trusts the old map more than the new path. It writes 3 old rules in chalk on the inner wall. Do what kept you safe. Save energy now. Avoid unknown roads. When the heart whispers new directions, the keeper stiffens in fear. Aya listened and felt the words settle into familiar spaces. She told him about the letters and the bowl and rain. She described the pulled strings behind her eyes and the trembling fingers. She shared the moment when anger arrived like a clean visitor. Miran nodded and noted a few lines in his notebook. He said the anger was a boundary waking from long sleep. He said boundaries are not walls but gates with honest hinges. A good gate swings open with care and closes with clarity. He cleared his throat and smiled with a hint of pride. He said he once worked with sailors who feared the shore. They had lived at sea for seasons and found rhythms there. When they returned to land, the ground felt wrong and unsafe. Their legs wobbled and their minds missed the hum of engines. The known motion can feel safer than the calm of stillness. The brain resists the quiet because the noise felt like shelter. Aya thought about her old relationship and felt a tender ache. Noise had been constant and complicated and strangely comforting sometimes. Silence now felt vast, like a field under winter sky. She said, "This field scares me, and yet it calls me." Miran wrote another note and lifted his head and spoke. He said fear often contains a map to the next practice. He asked what small practice could teach safety inside that field. Aya considered the question and placed a palm over her chest. She said she could walk every evening without her phone. Just 10 minutes on the quiet block near the post office. She would feel the space and hear her steps and breathe. She would notice trees and doors and the way dusk settles. Miran smiled and said that sounded like a gentle training ground. The keeper would learn that quiet can hold her without harm. A librarian passed with a cart and offered them warm smiles. Books moved like small houses across the room and found shelves. Miran tapped his notebook and said the next part gently. He said we must also meet the body where it stands. The mind is not a cloud floating above the chest. The brain lives in a body and measures danger by sensation. Tension and cold palms and knots can look like threats. He asked if her shoulders tightened when she touched the letters. Aya nodded and described the knot rising and falling and returning. Miran suggested a practice for days when knots refused to loosen. Choose one letter and hold it while counting breaths with patience. Place the letter down and shake the hands like rain. Press the feet to the floor and name 5 real details. The mind loves true details because details calm false alarms. Aya repeated the steps in her head and felt a shift. She could imagine the keeper watching and taking careful notes. This person is grounded and present and not in danger. The alarm can ring more softly when evidence feels solid. Miran watched her think and then offered another small lens. The brain makes predictions and then it looks for confirmation. We can feed it different evidence and change predictions slowly. He drew 2 circles on paper and labeled them with words. He wrote comfort in one circle and growth in the other. The circles overlapped in a shape that looked like a seed. The seed held the place where release can feel almost safe. He said we work in the seed and widen it through practice. Then the seed becomes a garden that can hold bigger steps. Aya traced the seed shape with her finger and breathed. Miran closed his notebook and leaned back with a thoughtful face. He said there was a second reason the brain resists endings. Loss cracks our sense of story and identity and timeline. The mind holds a picture of who we are becoming. When a bond ends, we fear the picture will turn blank. The keeper panics and clings to anything that keeps the picture. Sometimes it clings to pain because pain still points to someone. Aya felt those lines enter the deeper room inside her. She remembered weekends shaped around someone who is now gone. She remembered recipes and playlists and little routes across the city. These small things formed a net that once caught the day. Without the net, the hours feel like birds without perches. She looked at her hands and found a simple idea rising. She could build new perches before burning the rest of letters. She told Miran about a pottery class near the market street. She had walked past the studio and loved the slow wheels. Hands shaping clay into bowls felt like a lesson itself. Miran smiled and said the clay could help the keeper. You will teach your hands that creation follows release with grace. A bowl appears after the clay surrenders its earlier shape. A life appears after the heart releases a borrowed storyline. They took a pause and listened to the drift of pages. Outside, the river moved with a soft, metallic shimmer. Aya drank water and let the lemon touch her tongue. Her body felt present and awake and not in flight. Miran asked if she carried any questions for the keeper. He suggested writing a letter to the part that resists. Speak in kind sentences and ask it to share its worries. Aya wrote a few lines in her notebook with slow care. Dear keeper of maps and doors and alarms and patterns, thank you for every safe breath and every safe return home. Thank you for the quiet nights when you stood guard. I am older now and the house is different and steady. I will ask for help when the weather turns loud again. Please walk beside me while I practice these gentle releases. She slid the notebook toward Miran and waited for guidance. He nodded and said the tone was perfect for this work. He asked her to read the letter aloud inside her mind. She read and noticed a loosening like morning after cold rain. The library seemed to breathe with her for a few moments. Miran placed a small card on the table between them. The card held the library schedule and a private room number. He said she could use that room in the late afternoons. The room had soft light and a safe window and kettle. She could bring letters and practice and rest when needed. He would be nearby on most days if panic rose. Aya felt grateful and a little afraid of her own courage. She accepted both feelings as travelers sharing one path for now. She slipped the card into her notebook and closed the cover. Their conversation moved toward story again with quiet gravity. Miran spoke about a time he resisted a needed farewell. He had stayed in a partnership that dimmed his voice slowly. He had believed nobility meant staying and finding another solution. His keeper had praised him for endurance and loyalty and duty, but the price grew larger than his remaining light and breath. Eventually he left and felt both broken and finally honest. He told Aya that night he stood on a train platform. The wind was cold and his knees shook like new branches. A woman nearby dropped a scarf and he returned it quickly. She thanked him and said the cold teaches us our edges. He carried that line for years as a small compass. When life felt icy, he would locate his edges with care. Then he would wrap them with actions that felt like warmth. Aya listened and imagined her own edges glowing under attention. She had often blurred them to keep others comfortable and quiet. She had confused love with constant agreement and constant available energy. She had mistaken surrender for compassion and silence for wisdom. She did not blame herself and she did not shame herself. She simply saw the shape and decided to change the drawing. She would sketch bolder outlines and keep her center intact. Miran suggested a brief walk by the river before they parted. They moved through the stacks and nodded to the librarian with warmth. Outside, the air held a clean coolness that sharpened thought. The river looked like a road of glass that never stops. They walked in silence for a while and counted slow steps. Seagulls traced bright arcs above the water and then vanished. The city hummed behind them and the willows leaned closer. Miran paused near a bench and faced her with quiet eyes. He said the work is not to fight the keeper. The work is to bring the keeper along on safer roads. You will keep some memories and you will bury some carefully. You will keep some rituals and you will make new ones. You will lose a few moments and you will gain many. Trust the arithmetic of practice and the calendar of small courage. Aya felt the ribbon in her pocket and touched it gently. It was a sign and not a shackle and not a leash. She could return home and choose one more letter tonight. Or she could rest and drink mint tea and sleep early. Either choice would teach her that safety sits inside presence. She thanked Miran for his time and his patient, generous teaching. They agreed to meet again in 2 days around noon. They parted near the stone steps that led back to streets. Aya turned toward the market where the pottery studio waited. She pushed the door and entered the smell of clay and water. The room welcomed her with spinning wheels and soft radio music. A teacher with gentle eyes asked what shape she desired. Aya said a bowl that could hold warm soup in winter. The teacher smiled and guided her hands to the waiting clay. The wheel began to turn and the clay listened to touch. Her fingers pressed and lifted and coaxed a rising shape. The clay resisted at first and then found a smooth rhythm. She breathed with the motion and watched a wall appear. The wall curved like a quiet hillside under the moon. The teacher nodded and said the form looked strong and simple. Aya felt a clean joy that surprised her with its depth. She thought about release and about forming something new afterward. She felt the keeper inside her watching with curious, softer eyes. This is what we build when we loosen the old bonds. Not a void and not a cliff, but a container. A shape that holds life with warmth and steady sides. Clay became lesson, and lesson became gratitude without fireworks. She placed the bowl on a shelf and washed her hands. Late afternoon light leaned through the studio windows like gentle gold. She stepped outside and smelled bread from a nearby bakery. She bought a small roll and ate it while walking. The taste felt honest and the day felt well-stitched. She crossed a small bridge and watched the river deepen. A promise settled in her body without force or drama. She would return to the drawer tonight, but only for one letter. She reached her building and climbed the stairs with even steps. The door opened to a room that felt different and welcoming. She set her bag down and placed the notebook on the table. She stood by the window and watched a thin pink sky. Then she turned toward the drawer and opened it slowly. The letters waited like birds who no longer startled her. She chose one and closed the drawer with a calm hand. She did not light a candle this time, and that was fine. She held the letter and counted breaths as she had promised. She placed the page down and shook her hands like rain. She pressed her feet to the floor and named 5 details. A humming fridge at the edge of hearing and a cool glass. A small plant that wanted water and a thread on carpet. A distant siren that faded and a clean smell of soap. The keeper took notes and lowered the alarm by 1 notch. Aya read the letter and felt grief and love and steadiness. The page burned in the bowl and curled into dark petals. She poured water and watched tiny clouds lift and then vanish. Her chest felt warm and her shoulders stayed soft and present. She washed the bowl and placed it back on the shelf. The room seemed to exhale with her at the same time. Night gathered without weight and settled on rooftops and trees. Aya brewed mint tea and carried it to her bed. She drank slowly and allowed the taste to mark this evening. She wrote a short line in her notebook before sleep. Today I taught the keeper 3 new steps toward gentle release. Then she closed her eyes and followed her breath into rest. The city held her softly, and the future waited without hurry. The mirror of false endings. The next morning, sunlight slipped through the curtain in quiet stripes. Aya woke with the feeling of having traveled far in a single night. Her body felt rested, yet her thoughts stirred with strange colors. Dreams had painted images of rooms without doors and rivers with walls. She sat up slowly and whispered good morning to her own reflection. The mirror answered with the same calm eyes and faint smile. She remembered the plan to visit the library again at noon. She spent the early hours cleaning her apartment with slow rhythm. Folding clothes and wiping shelves became small acts of grounding. She placed her new clay bowl on the table with quiet pride. Its curve caught the morning light and cast a gentle shadow. Something about that shadow reminded her of a past self watching, the self who feared emptiness and filled silence with constant repair. Aya smiled kindly toward that ghost and returned to her tea. Around noon, she walked to the library through crisp autumn air. The trees along the road had begun shedding golden leaves. The city smelled faintly of bread and dust and waiting rain. When she reached the library, Miran was already there, reading. He closed the book as she approached and greeted her with warmth. His smile held the calm of someone who trusts time completely. They sat at their table again, the same corner by the window. Miran began by asking how the practice felt after 2 days. Aya said it felt like learning a new language for old feelings. Sometimes she caught herself translating pain into curiosity instead. Sometimes she failed and still forgave herself, which felt new. Miran nodded and said, "Forgiveness is the door the keeper forgets. It opens softly without demanding an explanation from pain. It teaches the brain that survival can include gentleness too." He then asked her to describe any memory that surfaced uninvited. Aya thought for a moment, then shared a fragment from years ago. She remembered a dinner where she had kept laughing to hide unease. The person across the table had spoken in careful, cutting tones. Her smile had been armor, her laughter a signal of submission. For years, she remembered only the warmth of the evening light. Now she saw the tension behind it like static behind music. Miran listened and said, "Sometimes the mind edits the film to survive. It blurs the danger and sharpens the beauty so we can continue. Later, when the heart feels ready, it restores the missing frames. That restoration can feel like betrayal because peace is interrupted. But really, it is integration, the final step of true release." Aya nodded, feeling the weight of those words settle into silence. She realized she had begun remembering more clearly since last night. He asked her to imagine her memory as a mirror with many cracks. Each crack showed a version of her that once carried a role. The caretaker, the pleaser, the dreamer, the guard, the forgiver. The goal, he said, is not to break the mirror further. The goal is to hold it steady until all versions see each other. When they recognize one another, resistance becomes conversation. The brain stops fighting the heart and begins listening instead. Aya felt tears pressed gently at the corners of her eyes. She said, "The mirror scares me because it shows my part in pain." Miran answered softly, "Awareness is not blame, it is direction." He wrote something in his notebook and slid it toward her. On the page, he had written, "What if resistance is care misplaced?" He asked her to think about it as homework for the week. Aya traced the sentence with her finger and breathed out slowly. They decided to try a brief experiment right there in the library. Miran asked her to close her eyes and picture her resistance. She saw a woman standing by a locked gate holding many keys. The woman's expression was not cruel, only deeply cautious. Aya said, "She looks tired and afraid of losing her job." Miran smiled and said, "Exactly. She protects you using old instructions. Your work is to show her the new safety manual patiently." Aya opened her eyes and laughed quietly through her tears. The image made her resistance feel human and not monstrous. Miran said, "When we personify the guard, we create space for dialogue. Next time you feel the push to stop healing, greet her kindly. Say, 'Thank you for warning me, but I will proceed slowly.' The brain learns from repetition, not force," he reminded her. Aya nodded and wrote the sentence down in her notebook. After their session, she walked to the nearby park for reflection. The pond glimmered with sunlight scattered through willow branches. She sat on a bench and opened her notebook again. The words "care misplaced" circled in her mind like migrating birds. What if her overthinking had always been her way to stay alive? What if holding on was once the safest response to chaos? She realized she had been angry at her brain for being loyal. A small laugh escaped her, half joy, half grief. She felt compassion bloom where criticism used to live. She whispered to herself, "You were only trying to keep me safe." A gentle warmth filled her chest like a small golden tide. She imagined the keeper from her dreams sitting down to rest. He placed his heavy keys beside him and watched the horizon. For the first time, she felt the distance between fear and wisdom shrink. That evening, she returned home and decided not to burn a letter. Instead, she read one slowly without judgment or agenda. The letter described plans that never happened and love that dissolved. She smiled softly, no longer flinching at the words, "Forever yours." Forever had simply meant, for as long as we were learning together. She placed the letter back in the drawer, not as a wound, but as proof. Proof that she had lived, felt, and survived without hardening. Before sleeping, she lit a candle and stared at the flame's movement. The flame bent with air, yet never lost its core of light. She thought of Miran's metaphor, the cracked mirror finding alignment. She whispered to the room, "I am not broken, I am rearranging." The words felt true and light and free of resistance. Her reflection on the window smiled faintly back at her. Somewhere deep inside, the keeper nodded and took another slow breath. As she drifted toward sleep, a dream began to form quietly. She found herself in a vast corridor lined with mirrors of memory. Each mirror showed a moment where she had almost let go but didn't. This time, the reflections turned their heads and looked at her directly. One by one, they began stepping out of the glass, joining her side. They didn't speak. They only breathed with her in synchrony. When she awoke, her pillow was damp and her heart strangely calm. The day outside was gray but open, like paper before words. Aya understood the next part of the work would be deeper. She would have to face the story of how her mind learned control. Not through logic, but through memory and movement and body, she whispered. "The mirror showed me my fragments. Now I must walk with them." The kettle clicked softly behind her, answering like a patient friend. And thus began the next quiet chapter of her becoming. The body that remembers before words. The morning began with wind tapping softly against the window pane. Aya opened her eyes and felt a strange heaviness under her ribs. It was not sadness exactly, more like an echo of old noise. She sat up and let her feet rest on the cold wooden floor. The city outside hummed, yet her room felt still, like a held breath. She knew today she would meet Miran again at the library. But something inside whispered, "Not yet. Stay with the feeling first." She closed her eyes and listened carefully to her body's small language. The pulse behind her neck, the dryness on her tongue, the tight belly. Each signal felt like a quiet sentence trying to be understood. She remembered Miran's words, "The brain lives in the body's evidence." So she placed her hand over her chest and spoke gently to herself. "What are you trying to say today, little one?" Her heart gave a slow answer, not in words, but in release. Memories began to float up like pages from a forgotten book. A classroom, a broken pencil, a teacher's voice sharp with disapproval. The sting of shame warming her cheeks while everyone else stayed silent. She had learned to hide reaction, to shrink her voice and her need. Her brain had recorded it as a rule: stay small, stay safe, stay invisible. That rule had shaped every relationship without her noticing clearly. This morning, her body decided it was time to show her that rule. Aya took a deep breath and stood up from the bed slowly. She stretched her arms toward the ceiling and exhaled with sound. The sound surprised her. It was low and trembling and real. It was not crying, not laughter, something older than both. She moved her shoulders in circles and felt tiny cracks of tension release. Her muscles seemed to remember years of holding back emotion. She whispered, "I am listening now. You do not need to protect me this way." The heaviness began to soften into warmth behind her ribs. It wasn't gone, but it was changing shape, becoming manageable. She showered, dressed, and left the apartment with slower steps. The sky was pale blue, the kind that promises neither rain nor sun. On the way to the library, she bought bread from a street vendor. The smell of sesame reminded her of mornings with her mother. She smiled faintly and thought, maybe healing is remembering ordinary joy. When she arrived, Miran was arranging chairs in the small side room. He looked up and greeted her with the same quiet steadiness. He asked how she had been since their last conversation. Aya told him about the mirror dream and the morning's heaviness. Miran nodded thoughtfully, then gestured for her to sit down. He said, "The mind tells stories, but the body holds archives. Sometimes the two speak different dialects until we teach them harmony." He invited her to close her eyes again and focus on breath. "Then," he said softly, "find the place in your body that resists peace. Do not force it to relax, just notice its shape and rhythm." Aya located it instantly, a knot near the center of her stomach. She described it as a clenched fist made of fog and heartbeat. Miran said, "Good. Now ask it what job it believes it's doing for you." She stayed silent for a moment, then whispered, keeping me prepared for loss. Miran nodded as if the answer was both ancient and expected. He said, "The body repeats what once kept us alive, even if it hurts now. We cannot shame it into stopping. We can only retrain it through trust. Each calm breath is a message sent upward to the mind's guard tower. Each safe pause tells the keeper, the danger has changed shape." Aya breathed again and noticed tears rising without sadness this time. They felt like gratitude, like water washing old instructions away. After the exercise, Miran handed her a small, folded note. It read, "The body heals through rhythm, not reason." He explained that movement, music, and breath can rewrite old codes. He told her about patients who found peace not in words but motion. Walking, drumming, dancing, even gentle humming could signal safety. He asked if she would try something before their next meeting. Spend one evening letting the body move without command or analysis. Aya agreed with a shy nod, unsure what that would look like. They talked for another hour about nervous systems and safety loops. Miran spoke about the vagus nerve and how breath can bridge mind and body. He said healing is not thinking better, it is sensing differently. He reminded her that release must include the muscles that carried fear. Aya wrote everything down carefully in her notebook. Then she thanked him and promised to begin her experiment tonight. The walk home felt different from other days. The sounds of the city seemed layered, horns, footsteps, whispers of wind. She sensed her body reacting to them like an orchestra tuning itself. Sometimes tightening, sometimes relaxing, all without conscious decision. She realized how much her body had always been listening for danger. Tonight she wanted it to listen for peace instead. She smiled at the thought and felt a small pulse of excitement. Back home, she changed into loose clothes and dimmed the lights. She played soft instrumental music, nothing with words or rhythm too sharp. For a moment she stood perfectly still, waiting for instruction. Then she remembered Miran's advice, let the body lead this time. She began swaying gently, shifting her weight between both feet. The movement grew into something fluid, unplanned, almost prayer-like. Tears ran down her face, but her mouth formed a faint smile. She didn't dance beautifully, but she danced honestly. Her arms rose like slow rivers, her head bowed and lifted again. Each motion felt like unlocking a door long sealed by logic. Her mind wanted to name the feelings, but she refused the words. She only breathed and moved and let the body speak freely. The music ended, but she continued in silence for a while. When she finally stopped, her whole skin felt alive and calm. She sat on the floor and wrote what she had learned that night. The body remembers what the mind forgets to protect the story. It hides truth inside breath, posture, and heartbeat. And when it feels safe, it returns the memory gently. Aya felt both lighter and more anchored than before. She washed her face, made tea, and opened her window to cool air. The city lights looked softer, as if the world was exhaling with her. Her phone buzzed with a message from Miran. "How did the practice go?" She replied simply, "I think my body finally told me it trusts me." He sent back a single line, "Then your brain will soon follow." She stared at that message for a long moment and felt peace settle. Outside, a street musician played a soft tune on an old violin. The sound carried up through the window and filled her small apartment. Aya whispered, "Thank you, not sure to whom, maybe to her own body." Before sleep, she looked at the clay bowl on her table. She placed the ribbon from the letters inside it like an offering. This is not an ending, she thought. This is an agreement. My heart will lead, my brain will learn, and my body will remember. She turned off the light and lay still, listening to her heartbeat. It was slower, rounder. No longer a drum of defense, but of rhythm. And somewhere deep inside, the keeper finally smiled and closed her eyes. The relapse that teaches trust. The next morning arrived heavy with rain and gray silence. I awoke late, her room filled with the damp smell of old clouds. The comfort from the previous night seemed to have dissolved quietly. Her chest felt tight again, her thoughts restless and sharp like broken glass. She sat up and whispered, "Not again. Not today." But the feeling stayed, curling behind her ribs like an unwanted guest. She closed her eyes and realized she was afraid of losing progress. She brewed tea but could barely drink half the cup. The warmth tasted distant, the sweetness dull on her tongue. She wanted to return to the calm of the dancing night before. But her mind had already started replaying old stories of failure. It said, "You always return to the same pain." It said, "Healing is an illusion you borrow for a few hours." Aya listened, then placed the cup down carefully on the counter. She had read somewhere that relapse is not the opposite of healing. It is the teacher that asks, "Will you apply what you learned?" So she took a slow breath even though her heart argued against it. She said aloud, "This is another practice, not a punishment." Her voice shook, but she meant the words. Then she opened her window to let the rain sound enter the room. The rhythm outside reminded her of the body's own quiet persistence. After breakfast, she wrote a few lines in her notebook. "Today my mind wants to return to the old cage, but the lock is rusted, and the key is with me now. Still, part of me misses the safety of confinement." Writing those words steadied her enough to leave the house. She grabbed her umbrella and began walking toward the library. The streets shimmered, the air cool against her skin. When she arrived, Miran was already waiting near the door. He noticed her expression and said softly, "The rain brought you something heavy." Aya nodded, her throat thick with unspoken frustration. They moved to their usual table where books hummed with quiet presence. Miran waited, allowing silence to unfold before speaking. He said, "You are learning the rhythm of healing now. The return of pain is not failure, it is rehearsal." Aya asked, "Then why does it still feel like I am losing ground?" Miran smiled with kind eyes because the brain still measures safety by control, and healing feels like chaos until trust becomes familiar. He asked her to describe what her body felt like that morning. She said it felt like holding breath underwater, waiting for rescue. Miran said, "That image itself is your guide today. Let's learn how to surface without waiting for someone else's hand." He led her through a simple grounding exercise with steady tone. Place one hand on your chest, the other on your stomach. Inhale through the nose, exhale with a whisper of sound. On each exhale, remind the body that air is permission, not danger. Aya followed, her hands trembling slightly at first. By the fifth breath, the trembling softened into small waves of release. Miran nodded, saying quietly, "The body trusts repetition more than reason." Then he spoke about the hidden purpose of relapse. Each return of pain tests the system's new vocabulary of safety. It asks, "Will you meet this storm with curiosity or panic?" When you choose curiosity, the neural map changes again. Aya listened, her face wet with tears she didn't try to hide. She said, "I never realized healing meant befriending discomfort." Miran smiled gently. "Yes, pain is the language of transformation when listened to kindly." They sat in silence for several minutes, listening to the rain. Each drop against the window sounded like a punctuation mark. Miran broke the quiet with a question that felt like light. "If your mind was a house, what room feels most crowded today?" Aya thought, then answered softly, "The room of memories that smell like guilt." Miran said, "Guilt is the guard dog that believes punishment equals control." He added, "You can train it to rest, not by force, but by consistency." He asked her to close her eyes again. Picture the guilt as a dog lying at the door, restless, barking. "What would you do if it were real?" Aya smiled faintly. "I would sit nearby until it stops barking." He said, "Good, that's all you must do internally too. When guilt barks, sit with it, breathe, and let it see you are not leaving. Eventually, the dog sleeps because presence feels safer than command." After their session, Aya stayed in the library a while longer. She walked between shelves and ran her fingers along the spines of books. The smell of paper and dust steadied her heartbeat again. She picked up a random poetry book and opened it halfway. The lines she saw read, The wound learns sunlight before it trusts the dawn. She smiled, feeling the strange poetry of her own journey mirrored there. She copied the line into her notebook before leaving. On her way home, the rain had stopped, but the air still shimmered. She took the longer route along the river, her steps deliberate and slow. The water moved dark and steady beneath the bridge. She whispered, "The brain fears letting go because it cannot predict the landing, but I do not need prediction. I need presence." A small bird darted above the water, wings cutting through mist. She followed it with her eyes until it vanished behind the trees. At home, she changed into warm clothes and lit a candle. She took out the bowl of ashes and stirred it gently with a spoon. Tiny pieces of burnt paper swirled like soft black snow. She didn't cry. She simply watched, feeling a quiet respect for endings. Then she added a pinch of salt to the bowl, like a ritual of cleansing. Miran had once told her salt symbolizes both tears and preservation. Perhaps grief could preserve wisdom instead of destroying peace. She opened the window to let a gust of cool air in. The curtain fluttered like the breath of something invisible but kind. She whispered, "Thank you to no one in particular." Maybe to the storm. Maybe to her past selves still learning patience. She realized that relapse wasn't proof of weakness. It was proof of effort. The body only replays what it believes still needs practice. And practice is how love rewrites fear into understanding. That night, before sleeping, she replayed the day in her mind. She pictured herself underwater, then surfacing slowly toward light. The water no longer felt suffocating, just heavy and real. As she reached the imagined surface, she took a full breath. Her chest expanded easily, and her shoulders relaxed in response. The keeper inside her whispered, "You did not drown this time." And Aya, half asleep, smiled at the sound of her own survival. In the quiet of that moment, something profound shifted again. She saw that healing was not about removing resistance. It was about moving through it with eyes open and breath steady. The brain would still protest, the heart would still ache sometimes. But the conversation between them had softened into partnership. They no longer argued about letting go. They negotiated it together. The night outside hummed with rain's echo as Aya drifted into sleep. And in her dream, she walked back into the corridor of mirrors. But this time, none of them were cracked or distorted. Each reflection smiled back, some tired, some radiant, all whole. Together they whispered the same truth in many different tones. Letting go does not mean losing. It means making room for peace. Aya woke before dawn, heart calm, mind silent, body warm. And for the first time, she did not fear the morning that followed. The surrender that feels like peace. The morning sun returned after many days of rain. Light slid across Aya's walls, touching the clay bowl, the ribbon, the notebook. She woke easily, without the old heaviness in her chest. For the first time, her first thought was not about control or loss. It was simple. Today I feel quiet, and quiet feels safe. She dressed, tied her hair, and left early for the library. The air smelled of earth after cleansing, the streets shining faintly. She saw children in bright uniforms laughing near puddles. She smiled. There was life again, unguarded and free. The keeper inside her watched, but no longer interfered. Miran was waiting by the window table as usual. He looked at her face and said softly, "You found the pause." Aya nodded, sitting down, her hands folded calmly. She said, "I had a relapse, then rest, and now something new. It feels like nothing, but in a good way." Miran smiled. "That nothing is peace," he said. "Peace is not the absence of feeling, it's the absence of struggle with it. The brain resists peace because it feels too quiet to measure. But once the heart proves the quiet is safe, the brain adapts. It learns to trust stillness like an old guard learning to sleep. Aya laughed quietly. She said, I think the keeper is finally taking naps. Miran chuckled. Let her rest. She's worked hard for decades. He took out his notebook and drew two overlapping circles again. One for memory, one for present. The shared space, he said, is integration. You've stopped living only in one or the other. Now they coexist. They sat together for a long while without needing many words. The silence between them felt like understanding itself. Outside, sunlight shifted through leaves and spilled across the table. Aya whispered, It feels strange to have nothing to fix. Miran answered, That is how you know the work has begun to settle. He told her that healing is not a finish line but a rhythm. You will still meet sadness, but it will not swallow you whole. You will still remember pain, but it will not define your voice. And one day, you will help others name their own resistance, not as a teacher, but as a witness. Aya nodded slowly, letting the words sink into her. For the first time, she did not crave a next step. She was content to sit inside this quiet middle space. Miran closed his notebook and said, You do not owe the past an argument anymore, just gratitude and distance. They walked to the river together one last time. The water gleamed gold in the late morning sun. A light breeze rippled the surface, scattering reflections into patterns. Miran said, When the brain resists letting go, it's protecting your identity. But identity can change without death. It can unfold. Aya looked at the water and replied, I used to think letting go meant forgetting. Now I see it means remembering without pain. Miran smiled. Exactly. Memory is not the enemy. Attachment to suffering is. She exhaled, and for the first time, it felt like her breath belonged entirely to her. That evening, she returned home and prepared a small ritual. She placed the last unburned letter into the clay bowl. Instead of fire, she tore it gently into pieces with steady hands. She whispered, Thank you for who I was when I needed you. And then she closed the window and let the night settle. She wrote one final line in her notebook before bed. Letting go is not losing. It is choosing to stay open when it's easier to close. Her handwriting looked calmer, larger, softer somehow. She closed the notebook, turned off the light, and lay still. Her body, her brain, and her heart breathed in unison for the first time. In her dream, she walked through a vast field of light. The mirrors from before stood around her, whole and clear. Each reflection stepped forward, merging gently into her skin. No words, no fear, just quiet union. When she awoke, the morning sun was waiting. Warm, real, forgiving. Aya stretched, smiled, and whispered to herself, the heart was ready first. The brain took longer, but both have arrived. And somewhere deep inside, the keeper placed her keys down forever. The room of gentle refusals had become a room of quiet beginnings. And so, the story of resistance ended not with a scream, but with a sigh. And the sigh, finally, sounded like peace.